Every evening at exactly 6:40 p.m., Thomas Reed sat alone at the small kitchen table, staring at two empty chairs. The food on his plate was still warm, but his appetite was gone. Some nights, he forgot to turn on the TV, and the silence filled the room instead. Thomas was 56 years old. For most of his life, he had believed that if you worked hard, stayed loyal, and kept your head down, things would hold together. He was wrong, but it took decades to understand that. He worked as an office clerk for a local insurance company. Not a big position. Just a gray cubicle, stacks of files, phone calls, and numbers that never seemed to end. He had been there for almost 25 years. Younger coworkers came and went. New systems replaced old ones. Thomas stayed. Reliable. Quiet. Replaceable, though no one said it out loud. His days followed a simple pattern. Wake up at 5:30 a.m. shower. Coffee. Drive to work listening to the same old radio station. At lunch, he ate a sandwich at his desk, scrolling through photos of his daughter and his grandson. He was a father once full-time. Now he was someone who waited for messages that didn't always come. For 32 years, he had been married to Susan. They raised 2 children together, paid bills, argued about small things, made up, drifted, didn't notice how far apart they were growing. Thomas believed marriage was something you endured, not something you constantly fixed. He thought silence meant peace. The house they shared now felt unfamiliar. Susan's mug was gone. Her shoes were gone. Even the sound of her keys on the counter was gone. The divorce papers were signed 3 months ago, but the weight of it hadn't settled yet. It hovered. Heavy. Unfinished. At night, Thomas lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying old moments. Things he should have said. Apologies he never offered. He wondered when exactly love had ended, and how he hadn't noticed. He didn't feel angry. He felt empty, and ashamed that at 56, he didn't know how to live alone. Mornings became the hardest part of Thomas Reed's day. Not because he was late or rushed, but because no one needed him there. He woke up before the alarm now. The bed felt too wide, the room too still. He made coffee for one, poured too much, and dumped the rest down the sink without thinking. Little habits from a shared life didn't disappear easily. At work, Thomas moved through the day on autopilot. He filed claims, answered calls, smiled when required. His supervisor once asked if he was doing okay, and Thomas nodded without hesitation. He had spent a lifetime pretending everything was fine. This was just another version of that skill. The office felt louder than usual, even though nothing had changed. Younger coworkers talked about weekend plans, school pickups, family trips. Thomas listened without joining in. He didn't know how to explain that his weekends were now wide open, not in a good way, but in a way that made time feel heavy. His daughter, Claire, called every Sunday. She tried to sound normal, careful not to ask too much. She had her own life now, a job, a marriage, a child who called Thomas grandpa with a voice that always made his chest tighten. Thomas loved his grandson deeply, but every visit ended the same way, a long drive home to an empty house. On one of those Sunday evenings, Thomas stood in the doorway after Claire left, holding a small toy car his grandson had forgotten. He turned it over in his hands, feeling something crack inside him. He wasn't needed the way he used to be. Not as a husband. Not as a father. Not even as a daily presence in his grandson's life. The loneliness didn't arrive all at once. It came in quiet waves, while folding laundry alone, while eating dinner without conversation, while realizing no one would notice if he skipped a meal or came home late. Some nights, regret hit harder than loneliness. He remembered choosing work over conversations, silence over effort, stability over closeness. He wondered if the divorce had really come out of nowhere, or if he had simply ignored the signs for too long. Thomas didn't cry. He just sat with the weight of it, telling himself that this was what life after 50 looked like. And that thought scared him more than he wanted to admit. The breaking point didn't come in a dramatic way. It arrived on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Thomas Reed stood in the laundry room, staring at the washing machine. The floor was covered in water. He had overloaded it again. Susan used to warn him about that. He used to laugh it off. Now there was no one to warn him. He grabbed a towel, knelt on the cold floor, and tried to stop the leak. His knees ached. His hands shook. For the first time since the divorce, something inside him gave way. He sat down on the floor and stayed there longer than necessary. Not fixing anything. Not thinking clearly. Just breathing. The house felt like a stranger. Simple tasks overwhelmed him. Cooking. Cleaning. Remembering which bills were due. He realized how much of his life had been quietly shared, and how little he had learned to manage alone. That night, Thomas opened a box he hadn't touched since the divorce. Inside were old photos, family vacations, birthdays, school plays. A picture of Susan laughing in the kitchen, flour on her face, looking directly at him like he was the only person in the room. His chest tightened. He wasn't angry at her. He was angry at himself. He saw it clearly now, how he had mistaken presence for connection. How he had believed providing was enough. How he had waited too long to ask how she was really feeling. At 56, Thomas felt like he was starting life without instructions. The next day at work, he made a mistake. A small one. A misfiled document. His supervisor corrected him gently, but the embarrassment lingered. Thomas had always been careful, dependable. Lately, he felt fragile. That evening, instead of sitting at the kitchen table, Thomas went for a walk. It wasn't planned. He just needed air. The neighborhood was quiet. Porch lights flickered on. Somewhere, a family laughed behind closed curtains. As he walked, Thomas admitted something to himself for the first time. He didn't just miss his marriage. He missed who he had been inside it. And for the first time, he wondered if it was too late to become someone else. Thomas didn't change overnight. There was no sudden motivation, no dramatic decision to fix his life. What came instead was something smaller and quieter. On Saturday morning, he woke up and didn't turn on the TV. He opened the window instead. The air was cool, fresh. It reminded him of mornings he used to rush through without noticing. He stood there longer than usual, breathing, letting the silence feel less like an enemy and more like space. Later that day, he cleaned the house properly for the first time since the divorce. Not because someone was coming over, but because he lived there. He cooked a simple meal. Nothing fancy. Just enough to sit at the table and finish it. A few days later, Thomas did something that surprised him. He called Susan. The conversation was short, awkward, honest. He didn't ask to come back. He didn't defend himself. He simply said he was sorry, not in a way meant to fix things, but in a way meant to own them. After the call, Thomas felt lighter. Not relieved. Just clearer. At work, he started speaking a little more. Asking questions. Admitting when he didn't understand the new systems. No one laughed. No one pushed him aside. The fear of being invisible had been louder in his own head. He began walking every evening. Same streets. Same time. Over time, the routine gave him something he hadn't felt in months. Structure he chose for himself. On one of those walks, he stopped by a small park. A grandfather was teaching his grandson how to ride a bike. The boy fell. The man helped him up, steady and patient. Thomas felt the familiar ache, but this time, it didn't hollow him out. It reminded him of something important. He still had a role to play. Maybe not the one he imagined, but one that mattered. He called his daughter that night and asked if he could pick up his grandson from school once a week. Not to prove anything, just to be present. When she said yes, Thomas sat quietly for a long time after the call ended. For the first time since the divorce, the future didn't feel like a closed door. Thomas Reed still ate dinner alone most nights. The silence didn't disappear, but it softened. On Wednesdays, he picked up his grandson from school. They didn't do anything special. Ice cream sometimes. A walk. Homework at the kitchen table. The boy talked about small things. cartoons, friends, questions that didn't need perfect answers. Thomas listened. Really listened. He learned how to live with himself. Not perfectly, but honestly. The house became less of a reminder of loss and more of a place that held his days. He learned which bills came when, which meals he liked cooking, which nights were hardest, and how to sit through them without running away. At work, Thomas stopped counting the years until retirement. He focused on the day in front of him. He wasn't chasing a new life. He was building a steadier one. Sometimes regret still visited him. Sometimes he missed Susan deeply. But those feelings no longer defined him. One evening, Thomas sat at the same kitchen table where the silence once felt unbearable. The chipped mug was in his hands. Outside, the street was quiet. Inside, something had shifted. He understood now that starting again after 50 didn't mean erasing the past. It meant carrying it differently. His life was still ordinary, still small in many ways, but it was his. And it was moving forward. If there is one thing Thomas learned, it's this. Even ordinary lives can find extraordinary meaning, even after 50. If this story touched you, don't scroll away just yet. There are many men over 50 who feel invisible, lost, or unsure if it's too late to begin again. If this story made you feel less alone, consider subscribing to Men After 50 Stories. And if you're comfortable, share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.